I want to read one passage to you, and I'm going to reference another passage, but I want to just read this to you and just kind of leave it there, hanging there, and and I'll refer to it, and it'll be the bulk of my message. But I want to read to you a passage from the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, verses 23 through 25. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 23 through 25. And I think it'll be clear what I'm drawing from this, but this is kind of an exhortation to the people who are followers of Christ. And so, as such, it's an exhortation to us as well. And so I just want you to keep that in your mind as I look at something as we kind of get close to Christmas. I'm already kind of beginning to talk about Christmas, but this year I want to talk about Christmas and Christ's birth and all of that in a very different kind of context. In the context of community, in the context of church. So let me read Hebrews 10, 23 to 25 to you, and then we'll reference a few other passages as well. Hebrews 10, beginning with verse 23. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful, meaning Jesus, meaning God. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Sometimes we get so familiar with something and we forget the purpose or the reason behind why we do something. My younger daughter had actually a good question for me. She said, why do we eat turkeys at Thanksgiving? Now, honestly, I think I knew this answer at some point, but I forgot. I don't really know why. Maybe, I don't know, maybe the Pilgrims, that was what was around, wild turkeys. That's what I kind of guessed, but I didn't really research it or anything. And she asked me questions like that. Or, why do we do this? Why does our family have this tradition? And we kind of forget. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes familiar, we get used to it, but we don't really think deeply into the meanings of it. And so this is why holidays, and this is why card trips are actually good. You get to sit down and talk about things and think about why we do what we do and the reason behind it. But as I was thinking about that this past couple of weeks, and as I was thinking about, as we get to Christmas, what is Christmas about? I know we have all the stuff, we have all the what the world says about all the gift giving, and there's a lot of good cheer, and we're trying to love one another. It's about family, it's about friends, it's about helping others, and all these good things, and there's nothing wrong with all of those things. But ultimately, if we go back to Jesus, what is Christmas about? Why did he come into this world? And when you really think about it, of course, he came into this world to save it. He died on the cross to atone for our sins. We know that whole gospel message. But what's really fascinating to me, more than anything else, is that Jesus set up the church while he was in this world. He said, look, I'm going to go back to God in heaven, but I'm going to establish the church. And the thing is that we're so familiar with that word, or at least even if we haven't attended church for very long, we've heard that word before. Some kind of formal religious organization, whether it's the Christian church or a different religion, that we're kind of familiar, and all that word just has all different kinds of meanings and connotations for each and every one of us. But sometimes, in thinking about church, we forget about, why do we meet? Is it about coming to church on Sunday, this place, this building, and gathering and listening to Pastor James or some pastor at some place and getting some theological, food for the week that'll last us, that'll help us in our daily walk, in our daily lives at work, at school, whatnot? But I want us to go way back, and I don't want to get theological on you. I'm not trying to get deep on you, but I want us to have this kind of common understanding of the church, because the church in the Bible that Jesus established was never about a physical building, some kind of nonprofit organization, a group of people that gathered together. It had this basis, and what Jesus really wanted us to know, and what I really want us to get grasped and understand, what the whole New Testament, when it's talking about church, when you begin to piece it all together, forget about all your experiences, all your understandings, all your definitions. What I think it comes down to And this took me a long time to come to this realization, because in seminary we had all the theological and all the deep understandings of it. And just to unpack it a little bit, I want you to understand this about the church. The church, what Jesus always intended it to be was this. His followers gathered together, living their lives in such a way that it would manifest, reveal who he was. You know, there's a definition that Paul gives, and he says that Christ is the head and that we are the body. And there's a lot of other understandings and definitions explaining different aspects of the church. But really, literally, the most basic thing that I've kind of come to a conclusion about the church that you have to understand about its purpose and function and what it's really about is that when people who believe in Christ gather together in a local place, in a certain geography, and they begin to enter into each other's lives, and they begin to live out the way that they talk, the way that they act, the way that they encourage, the way that they support, the way that they challenge one another, the way that they live together. If it is really in the heart and the mind of Christ that begins to reflect and manifest who Christ is. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm making it too theological, but I'm trying to explain to you. It's not Sunday worship, it's not Bible study, it's not some small group gatherings, it's not just events, but it's when we see believers interacting and the way that they communicate, when it's done with the Spirit of God present there, or when it's done in the right way, then we begin to see, we begin to catch a glimpse, a reflection of who God is. But what's really fascinating to me is that here we're coming towards Christmas, and Jesus is born in a manger. And we all know that story, whether we've been in church at all. People in this world who are not Christians know that story. But what's fascinating to me is that that story is actually the story about the church. Let me explain. In John chapter 1, verse 1, it says something very interesting, because here's John, the Apostle John, the disciple, one of Jesus' followers, and he writes a gospel about Jesus, trying to explain who Jesus is to people. And he writes his gospel towards the tail end of his life, many, many years removed from when he was a follower or disciple of Jesus, and they were actually roaming the countryside together. And so his is a little more developed, it's much more theological, it's much more deep, and he uses a lot more allegories and illustrations. But here's what he says in John 1. He says about Jesus, he says this: "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." If you read that, I don't think you really understand it if you have no background within the church. But literally what John is saying is, look, Jesus Christ was and is God, and he was with God later. And God sent him as the Word, as a message, as a communication into this world, to manifest, to be the best message ever of who God is. But then why does God take Jesus out of the world later on? Well, Jesus says, look, I set you guys up. You are now the message. John chapter 1 is actually about the church too. Jesus is the Logos, the Word. That's what it says in the Greek. It's this specific message that God gives, that he wants the world to know about himself. Well, the church now has that role of speaking that message. That's the purpose of the church. That's why we're still in this world. Even after we come to know Christ and get saved and our sins are cleansed, why don't we just instantly get transported into heaven and taken out of this world? Because there's a task that we have, and that task is to be the message of Christ. Well, how do we do that? How do we represent God? How do we manifest God? And see, here's the problem I think that we have. That the church forgets that we're the message of God. But here's the problem that I find. Is that we think that in being the message of God, we have to be like Christ. Yes, we're supposed to be like Christ, but we can never be Christ because We're imperfect, he's perfect. We're sinful, he's sinless. Then how does that work? How does the imperfect represent the perfect? How does the sinful represent the sinless? Well, if you continue on, John chapter 1, it says very interesting, because in verse 6 it says, there was a man sent from God. This is John the Baptist, whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. Verse 8, he was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. The church bears witness about the light. We are not the light. We reflect the light. We bear witness to the light. Now, how does that work? Let me just give you a few things, because as we talk about church and talk about community, I've been talking about this off and on for a number of years now, but the realization is this: when we come to church, or any church, if you end up moving and you're looking for a church, how do you find the right church to go to? How do you find the right gathering of people to go to? Well, there's no right or wrong place. It's whether or not you decide to connect in there, because you, as a believer, are already a part of the church, whether you know it or not. It's just that how are you going to choose to manifest God? See, you can either be a foggy, dirty mirror, or you can be trying to clean that up so that you can reflect Christ as best you can. It requires effort on our part. But here's the thing that's fascinating to me, and this is where a lot of us, myself included, as Christians, get it wrong. When you go to, not all, but many churches, what you find is that people present their best selves. We clean up a little bit, we dress up a little bit maybe. I know we're much more casual, that's fine. But we don't go there and like, oh, here's all my junk, here's all my garbage, here's all my problems. We don't go there to just kind of pour out on other people. That's awkward, especially when you don't know each other very well. But what happens is that oftentimes at church, we kind of get to the place where the pastor preaches about all these things and about how we're supposed to be. And we feel like, oh, if I'm not there, then maybe I can't belong to this church. And so we have this standard of behavior. No, the church doesn't have that at all. It shouldn't have that at all. The church, yes, it speaks the truth. But what I'm trying to get at is that you don't have to be all fixed up, all right, all perfect before you can become a part of the church, or before you can be involved with the church. That's like telling people you have to be healthy before you come to the hospital, like you have to be fit before you join the gym. It doesn't work that way. The church is where we go through all of that, and here's the problem. The church, this gathering of believers, unless we let down the walls and let who we are be known by other people, will never manifest Christ's glory, will never be his message in this world. So people ask me, well, why is that, Pastor James? Well, it's because it's in our imperfection that Christ is glorified. It's when we are weak that we're strong. How does the imperfect manifest the perfect? It's by contrast. When you look at a church and you see all kinds of imperfect people, all kinds of messed up, broken people who are honest about it, and yet somehow together they go beyond their individual problems and issues, that's when we begin to see the power, the grace, the amazing love of God in action. The problem is a lot of us, we want to just cover up. We don't want people to see that thing. We want, I'm okay, I'm all right. And as a result of that, we never actually get better, but rather we're in this facade. And so a lot of times at church, it's a gathering of people for a religious service once a week or a Bible study. And if that's all that it is, then we're not doing a very good job of reflecting the message and the word of God. That's what I'm trying to get at this morning. So, when we're talking about, hey, let's have this couples dinner, and let's have these, singles gatherings or whatever. And yes, there's Bible study, and yes, but more than anything else, it's about knowing the truth of God, but sharing life, revealing ourselves one to another so that we can speak truth into each other's lives, to know and be known. Because in that's how the light of Christ is manifest. in the transformation. Have you ever seen something transformed, or have you ever seen an artist doing a work? I mean, I'm not talking about just minor things. I'm not talking about some masterpiece, but even if you go to some place where they're doing, some guy's drawing caricatures of people for $15 or whatever they charge nowadays, and they start drawing it out, and you're looking at it, and your friend's the model, or your daughter, or your husband, or whoever, and you're looking at it. In the beginning, you just see some circles, and then as it begins to get the detailed form, you go, wow, it's pretty amazing, and it's pretty cool, especially when they're talented, and you get to see that. Well, what are you marveling at? You're marveling at the work of the artist. You're marveling at whoever's doing that, right? Or I think one of the most fascinating things I've ever seen up live is a glass blower who would blow the glass, and within like 8 or 9 minutes, he would make this ornate horse, out of one piece of glass, pull things, and keep heating it up, and it would have all the and I'd be like, I couldn't even draw that if you gave me, hours. But he's so gifted and able to do it. And I remember seeing that, I was just utterly fascinated by it. You see, the reason why our weaknesses, the reason why who we are, exactly where we are when we met Christ is so important is because there is love, there is this potential, but here's who we are. We have to start there. We don't start out by saying I was almost all the way there. I was 99% of the way to heaven. And Jesus just kind of filled that last bit and pushed me over the edge, and that's why I'm saved. Can you imagine someone who takes this huge masterpiece, or takes a photo, and then they just put one little touch of paint on it and goes, there you go, it's done. Nothing. That's not what's going on. But that's what we act like the church is. Oh, I'm a pretty good person. I just needed a little bit more of a push over the edge. It's not it. And this is why the imperfect actually reflects the perfection of God. And this is why Christ said, you're my church, you're my body, and I'm going to use you to help other people know about the love and the grace of God. This is the actual purpose and the active role that every single person has. Isn't it funny? Just in the way that you interact, you're going to be either reflecting God's love and His grace and His light, or you're not going to be doing it as well. That's just the reality of it. And this is why it's so important for us to be deeply connected with. And it's just intentional. It's a choice. It's something that we need to choose to do. That's why in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 23 through 25, now I'm going to unpack that a little bit for us this morning. It just gives us some very simple things. In the beginning it says, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. You know what that says to me? It says, you're imperfect, you're a sinner, you're messed up, you have problems, you've got all kinds of issues in your life. Okay, but you can have hope. And you don't have to worry about Christ ever rejecting you, because that's exactly who God came for. You can never fully receive the grace of God until you confess that you need it. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? This is why it always comes back to parenting for me, because that's my number one role of emphasis. Not just as a human dad or earthly father, but as someone who's supposed to shine the light of Christ into my kid's life, right? And one phrase that we took out of their vocabulary, because I realized I did it all the time too. We took out the phrase, 2 words, I know. If you talk to my girls and you hear them say that, then correct them. I hate it when people say I know, especially my girls. Because you know what I would say to them when they say, no, you don't know. Right? I told you to clean up your room. Oh, I know. Well, then why aren't you doing it? You don't know. You need to be reminded again, right? I said we're going to leave in the morning early. Aren't you ready? It's okay, I know. It's just a phrase that we use, right? But a lot of times what it is it's endemic of this heart attitude that says, I don't want your help, or I don't want to admit that I'm wrong, or that I'm lacking in some way. I'm homeschooling my daughters, and my younger one, and we're doing some problem, and she's like, "Ah," and then I said, well, that's not right. But no. She doesn't know. She just doesn't want to be shown wrong. She hates it, you know? So she goes, and then she'll sit there and look at it. So we're not allowed to say I know. I mean, I find myself seeing it sometimes. Yeah, okay, I better not say that. It's endemic of our heart issue. We do not like to admit that we're wrong, that we're weak, that we need help. And this is one of the biggest barriers to relationship. And this is why it's amazing to me, because in Hebrews, it just says from the very beginning, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. My hope is in Christ. And so I can reveal my junk. I can reveal my issues, my shortcomings. Because my hope is not in me, but it's in Christ. And so the church, not just talking about Qumran or the well or just, this, but I'm talking about when you're connected with one another, other believers, we have to be transparent and vulnerable. Doesn't mean that you go around telling every Christian on Sunday morning over coffee, let me tell you all my problems. No, not like that. But there needs to be some people in your life who see. I think sometimes the church has done itself the Christian church has done itself a huge disfavor, because we go out to the world and we want to say, hey, don't do this, don't do that, that's right, that's wrong. You know what I think the Bible literally says? The Bible literally says is that we are not to judge those outside of the church, but those inside of the church. I'm not saying that we don't see certain things are sin. That's fine, the Bible says that, but we shouldn't be so preoccupied with that. But what we should be preoccupied with saying is, hey, we're all messed up. We all have sin. We all have issues. But here's the thing. I can be honest about it because Christ accepts me as I am. Because of that, now we can start being real. And that's the beginning to healing. That's the beginning of growth. So the first thing that I want to tell you about the church, and I really want to emphasize this because I still feel like a lot of us, we still have a hard time with it. It's the basis of discipleship. It's the basis of everything. Jesus basically says, you know what? You've got to let light shine into your life. It's the only way to be clean. It's the only way to diagnose. It's the only way to deal with stuff in your life. Okay? That's the only way. I can harp on that a while, but I'm going to jump forward. In verse 24, it says this in Hebrews 10, and let us consider how to stir one another to love and good works. The problem is that sometimes there's some churches I've been to that are really good about just being transparent. And so a lot of people who are broken, who have difficult issues, they like going to that church. And I have no problem with that. I think that is the half the battle right there. The problem is so many of us, we think we have it together and we're afraid. So if we can get past that, that's great. And depending on your family, your upbringing, your cultural background, if you have shame, or if you're afraid of all of those things, maybe that's the way I was raised up. And so it's shameful to admit those kinds of things. But that's the basis of the gospel. But here's the thing, we can't stop there. Then the church is this. Not only do we know each other, but we don't just go like, oh, well, you're messed up, I'm messed up, let's just be messed up. No, it says here, let us consider how to stir one another to love and good works. In other words, we look at each other's lives and we say, look, but I want to be better. Don't you want to be better? It's not for salvation. Christ already accepts us. But I want to love better. I want to be a better person. I want to be a better dad. I want to serve people. I want to be a better worker. I want to be a better employee. I want to be better in all these ways. I want to be a better husband, better wife, better son, better brother, sister, daughter, whatever. All those things. I want to be better. I want to love more. And the church comes along and we look at that and we challenge one another because we know And we can speak to one another. Maybe it sounds harsh. And I know some of you, I've had conversations, especially some of the younger guys, and I said, when you do this, this is what happens. And I'm not saying to you just because I'm mad that you dropped the ball or I'm mad because you disappointed me, but because I care about you and I want you to be better. I want you to be stronger. I want you to, it doesn't mean that I'm going to stop loving you unless you do these things, but I love you so that I want you to do that. Why do I discipline? Why do I constantly correct and try to challenge my girls? Because I love them. May not always feel like that to them, but that's really my motivation. I don't do it perfectly in any stretch of the imagination. But here in verse 24, what a healthy church is doing is it's actually speaking to each other. I mean, think about it. In a church, you're together, in a church every Sunday, and then some couples having marital problems, and you never address that. You never encourage them. You never try to help them with that. Then is that the church? No, that's a very poor reflection of the way that the church ought to be. Now, I'm not saying that we should go around, minding everybody's business, but what I'm saying is there should be some people within the church that you're connected to, that you know enough, and then when that happens, you go, you know what? Because we're both followers of Christ, it is my business. Because God has given us a certain kind of, it is my business to point out something that I see. And maybe you might want to do it you should do it very humbly. You say, this is what I'm seeing. Is this what's going on? And if you have a transparent relation, that person will say, you know what, this is what we've been struggling with these things. And we need to talk. Doesn't mean that you're going to solve all their problems, but because you're doing it, go, I'm here for you. Do you know how many more marriages would stay together? Do you know how healthier marriages would be? How healthier families would be? Do you know how healthier we would all be if other people spoke into our lives and we would just share? Because just by the fact of knowing one another's problems, just to know that somebody else knows, I don't know, there's a power in that, especially among Christians, and it just alleviates those things. You know why? Here's the number one reason why, I'll tell you. Because when we keep it to ourselves, we feel like if anybody knew, then we have this imagination of how they might treat us, or how we might be ostracized, or how we would be shamed or embarrassed. But when they lovingly embrace you and then say, how can I help? All of a sudden, all that fear goes away and all that stress just gets released. It's so much easier, and the load of stress just gets off your back. We're supposed to love one another and challenge one another and encourage one another to do better. It's not just about saying, oh, here's all my garbage. Sometimes I see people in a relationship in the world that just knows all the junk, and they just openly talk about it. And I'm not going to change either. And they just kind of accept each other. And it's like, hey man, since you're messed up and I'm messed up, and we accept each other, we can be friends. And I'm like, okay, that's good in that part of it, but do you really want to be that person all your life? Is that what you want to do? Not within the church. We give permission to one another to speak. Verse 25, then it says, not neglecting to meet one another together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Here's the final part of this just short snippet in the book of Hebrews about the church. Number one, it says, we're the manifestation of Christ and reflection of Christ and His grace and His love. So first, we're able to just be freely open, and we still love each other, and we still, care about one another, whatever we've done, whatever we're still doing, wherever we're at. But we're not satisfied with leaving people there. We want to encourage and speak truth and help each other to do better and to be better. And then finally, it says that when we gather together, we encourage one another. In other words, say, I'm going to be here for you. Even if you're going through a place where you're like, you're rejecting all my advice, or you're saying, I don't really want to hear it, and you're not willing to even get any help, but I'm still going to be here with you. I'm going to still be committed, consistent here. And that is an amazing encouragement. Earlier this week when we were driving up to Northern California, it was funny because I said, hey, I told my girls, hey, I was saying, we're going to grandma's house, but along the way I kept saying, oh, we're going home. And she said, no, home is here. And I was like, well, I mean, we're going to grandma's house. But for me, it was just like, where my mom is where home is in a certain sense, right? Why? Because she knows everything, pretty much. I mean, she does. I don't know if you guys know this, but my mom lost her dad when she was just a little older than Catherine. And so her mom raised 3 girls, and she's the oldest. And she finished high school, then started working, and then went to night school back, way back when, to go through college, and then sent both of her younger sisters to prestigious, colleges, and she wouldn't let them work. And that's how, my mom, helped raise her younger sisters. So she went through a lot. And so what's funny is that when I lost my wife, I didn't realize this, but she knew exactly what Catherine was going through in a different kind of a way. And I didn't even think about that. She says, oh, I know what Catherine's going through. I'm like, what do you mean you know what she was going through? You didn't lose your mom. Oh, you lost your dad, that's right. And I didn't even think about that. I mean, I never met my grandfather on that side anyway, because he passed away. She was like 13 or 14 or something like that. I said, oh yeah, you do know. To know that someone knows your weaknesses, I mean, all the ways that I messed up when I was younger, wiped my bottom when I was a kid, just everything, carried you, right, in her womb, all that stuff. To know that they're going to be there for you, no matter what. That's why it's home, because when I get there, it's just relaxing. It's different than going to in-laws. I'm sorry, but that's just the reality of it, right? It's different than anywhere else, uncle, aunt's places, wherever. I mean, my house, yeah, of course. But the cool thing about going to mom's place is what? Somehow she reads your mind. My mom doesn't cook that much anymore. She's getting older, and she's getting kind of arthritic in her hands and stuff like that. And she said, you want me to make you anything? I said, oh, no, don't make anything. So we went up, and then on Wednesday, Catherine and I, and we went out and we made a menu, and we, said, this is what we're going to make for Thanksgiving, and so we were cooking. And then she actually had one of her friends that's another elderly lady that was by herself this Thanksgiving because her son's family was out of town, so she invited and brought her over. And I said, oh, that's great. So we had 2 grandmothers, 2 kids, and me. So that was our Christmas. Our Thanksgiving was really fun. So we were cooking, and she didn't cook anything because I didn't want her to. And but then afterwards, we had a lunch because they're both older. They want to eat and go to sleep, I guess. And so we were done around like 2, 3, and then I took a nap, and then I woke up. And she had already made it, but it was all in the fridge, and so for dinner, we're just going to eat leftovers, but she made, I don't even know how to explain it, just kumtang, I don't know, but it was one of my favorite things when I was growing up, and I thought, I didn't want any more roast or mashed potatoes or stuffing or whatever else, and so she made the soup, right, with all the, and she made it with everything, and the soup was so thick, you couldn't, your spoon would disappear, you can't, the spoon would come up and it's like milk, right, it was like she'd been boiling it for days and days, simmering for days and days. So it had all my favorites. Okay, I'm going to write that. Tripe, intestines, beef tendon, ligaments, shank meat, all that stuff. And of course, my girls, we ate it for 3 meals. They already know. And just by eating that soup, I was encouraged. Isn't that weird? Why? Because the soup was so good. I don't know if it's better or not, but in my mind it is. Why? Because my mom, who knows me, I said, don't make anything, but why does she make that? Because she knows I like it. And somehow it just hit the spot. And both my girls were like, Dad, this is so good. It was so funny. How do we encourage one another as the church? When we know each other, when we're pushing and we accept one another, and we're challenging, we want the best for one another, and then we just stand together for one another. That's the simple understanding of the church. It's not about how faithful you are every Sunday, because you want to be with other people that know you like this. It's like coming home when you have this kind of environment. in connection with other people. This is why I'm encouraging you guys and challenging you guys to make the most of every opportunity to gather together. And I know you can't come to everything. I'm not trying to give you a guilt trip, but what I'm saying is, as you begin to connect with one another, and you know, there's no such thing as the perfect church because it's all the church, but wherever God puts you in that season and that time, if you feel like, okay, this is okay, then how much you invest in the point. And here's the thing that I know. This is the one relational truth I've learned within the church that's so amazing. When you get to know people, I mean, really get to know people, wherever you're at, and you invest, people are willing to invest back. It's just that nobody wants to make the first move. That's the hard part. We're always waiting for someone else. And it's not easy. Because we've probably been burned in relationships. We probably had people who seemed all this, but then when you get into it. And so as we get older, we get a little more cynical. I'm not saying don't guard your hearts, but what I'm saying is give it a chance. What I'm saying is base it on Christ. And if we do that, then we will experience what the church is. We will know, we will be a part of it. And we will have such joy. And we will really understand what Christmas is about. That's coming up. Let's pray together.